Hey everyone, it's Kevin. Welcome back to the channel. So this is a new 2D 3D scene I just created in Blender 3D with Grease Pencil, and I wanted to walk you guys through it. So this scene features Theo, who is my desk plant, and it's getting acquainted with some other plants, tending to them, watering them, but there is one plant that Theo isn't sure of, and it's this three-headed Cerberus looking like Monstera. It's just not sure if it's supposed to be a friend or a foe. This piece was really fun because this was the first time that I featured Theo in some sort of a animation or a scene I created. If you have seen a Theo short before, you'll know that it specifically exists in my physical space. So being able to translate Theo into an animation has been super fun. It's also been a while since I created a scene. I think my last one was the It's a Small World inspired animation. So this was pretty exciting to come back to it. I felt like I had a creative roadblock and I just needed a little bit of a break, and I focused on other creative projects and 3D printing. So it was really nice to return to the workflow that I was really familiar with. I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with this scene, but I just thought of an idea surrounding plants, specifically that three-headed Monstera, and I kind of just went from there. I really got into plants last year towards the end of 2023. I had always liked plants, but I never really thought of starting my own collection until that time. It's been honestly so rewarding and fun to be able to, have them and care for them and just see them grow. So I wanted to show that love of plants that I have in my art, and I really like how this turned out. So I approached this piece pretty simply. I didn't really want to complicate the process too much. Like I said, it's a 2D and 3D piece, and what I mean by that is that it features both 2D and 3D elements. So this scene is comprised of 3D meshes, and the 2D elements are the ones that I created with Grease Pencil. Grease Pencil is a tool that allows you to draw 2D and 3D space. Although it's technically a 3D tool, the reason why it's 2D is that the way that it works is that it works in planes. You could also draw directly on the surface of a mesh, but it allows for drawing and animating directly in the 3D viewport. So in combining it with 3D elements, it adds a new level of interactivity within your artwork. For me, this was pretty game-changing, especially 4 years ago when I started using Blender, because again, coming from a graphic design background, I never really felt the need to try 3D, but being able to see how much combining 2D elements and 3D elements can really elevate my workflow, I really fell in love with that process, and it's kind of been my go-to ever since. Well, Blender 3D has been kind of a go-to program for me ever since. Here, I focused first on creating that three-headed Monstera. So I created the meshes for those leaves first, and then I started to build the other plants around this scene. Then I shaded them, and then I added the Grease Pencil elements on top to accentuate it, and then I added some compositing effects afterward to tie the scene together. The process wasn't that clear-cut or orderly, but for the purposes of this video, I feel like this is the best way to describe how I was able to create this scene. To be honest, I did just work on plants one by one. I went back and forth with the composition and even colors, and it was kind of a chaotic process, but that's kind of how all of my pieces are. So this one was just really to help me break out of the creative roadblock that I was going through. So starting with the meshes, I kind of built off this style that is seen in my It's a Small World video and in the Velocity video. So if you want to check them out, I'll leave links below. But I've kind of been working with this textured watercolor-like shader for some time, and I wanted to use that here. So it is a procedural shader that has some texture on it, but I also used Vertex Paint in order to get some gradation there. I just wanted to alter the color a little bit. And Vertex Paint allows you to paint directly onto the mesh. So although I have a toon shader on it, I have some color differentiation using Vertex Paint. And then I also have a image texture on top of it for some of the finer details. My approach to adding some of the vertex color was that I wanted some dynamic gradients in some of the plants. Like here, I wanted it to go from really bright yellows to dark greens, or have some blues and purples, and this was a way for me to just keep the color varied as opposed to just making it all green. I did add some sort of a finisher on it, so there is a lot of like sheen and gloss, and I was able to do that using the Fresnel node and the glossy BSDF. I think here it might have been a little too bright, but I think it still worked out. You know, although it's supposed to look matte or like a plant, I really like the stylization here, so that is something that I wanted to make sure I included. After that, I went in with grease pencil in order to add some of the details. So grease pencil is used in a couple of different places here, and specifically in the Monstera, it's used to outline a lot of the features, like the leaf shape, and then I used grease pencil on the faces. But for all of these items here, so everything that's in black, this is a lot of the watercolor brushes. I honestly just use the default brushes. I think they work fine for me. And the default brushes are the ones that come in the Grease Pencil Tools add-on. And if you don't know what that is, it's a free add-on that comes with Blender. So in order to add it, all you'll need to do is just go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then you can search Grease Pencil Tools and then toggle it. And in order to enable it, you just need to select your Grease Pencil object, go into Draw Mode, and then in the Active Tool and Workspace Settings tab, you can just click this Brush Specials dropdown and then select Download an Import Texture Brush Pack. And the brush that I generally use is the F-Text Oil. I usually just alter the size and opacity with the Sculpt tools, and then with Vertex Color, I try to match some of the other colors of the meshes in order to make it all just feel cohesive. Other places that I use grease pencil are in these elements here in the background, these Monstera leaves, and then these additional leaves at the bottom here, and then obviously Theo. Now to animate the elements here, I actually rigged a lot of the leaves because I wanted the animation to feel ambient but also natural at the same time. And I think a lot of the focus that I put, or the emphasis I put, was on the Monstera. I wanted to make sure that I had the stem of the Monstera to follow it. So whenever I move the Monstera leaf, the stem would follow along. This was a really simple rig. I actually just used inverse kinematics in order to accomplish this, and then animated the Monstera leaf with some noise modifier so that it would subtly move and then the stem would follow it. Now the other things were that I did rig a couple of the other leaves for the other plants, and this was mainly for positioning, but then it was also good for animating. And again, I just keyframed the rotation on certain bones within those plants, and then I added a noise modifier in order for it to subtly move. There's nothing really too complicated here, to be honest. I really just relied on using those modifiers. But the great thing is that in order to make it looping, there is a parameter in these modifiers, which is the restrict frame range parameter, and that allowed me to be able to determine when the animation or the noise modifier would start, so that whenever it reach the end of the animation, it would just loop again and not really look jarring. So as far as animating the grease pencil objects, I did subtly animate some of the leaves in order to give it some ambient movement, but I did rely heavily on the noise modifier, which allows some subtle shaking of the points of the grease pencil elements. So if you don't know how grease pencil elements are set up, when you draw with them, they're not just one stroke, they're actually comprised of points. And you can use the noise modifier or add this modifier in order to affect those points' position. It's super effective in achieving different effects, but also just giving some ambient animation to the scene. So I added this noise modifier on a lot of the strokes here, and then on some of the other elements, and on Theo. Now this animation for Theo, I honestly just reused from a previous one that I created, which is this one, this most recent one, where I find out that Theo actually has its own plant. I wasn't sure exactly how Theo was going to interact with this Monstera. Initially, I thought of Theo having some sort of a helmet and a sword. I don't know how that really made sense, but I thought it would be really funny and cute. But I re-looked at that short and felt like this could also work in the context of the scene. So I like how Theo has kind of this small watering pail, and then it's just this giant monstera, and Theo isn't sure what to do with it, and it just kind of fits. So I did adjust some of the animation in order for it to loop. Obviously in the short, it's really specific when I reveal the plant and then you see Theo turn around. But here I had to have some sort of a looping animation. So I just edited it in order to accommodate what I needed. So this shader can be affected by lights in the scene. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out a couple of my other videos where I do more of a deep dive on it. So I'll leave links to them below. But because of that, I did use quite a few lights here in order to manipulate the look of the meshes. Unfortunately, with that workflow, there is some glitching that could occur depending on where those lights are placed or where the shadows fall. So I really needed to be mindful to avoid it. I'm actually not sure how I can avoid that because it seems to happen in situations that are pretty unexpected. So I'll need to do a bit more experimenting on that. Yeah, I was able to find a workaround and just uncheck those shadows, and that's generally what I do if I encounter some of those glitching issues when using lights with a toon shader, and it seems to work fine. So I don't know how feasible that is for animations I'll do in the future, so I want to find a better solution for that. The other effects that I added were these lights that I created with Grease Pencil. So Grease Pencil is capable of blending modes, and so I set these lights on a hard light blending mode or an add blending mode, and I lowered their opacity. I also added a blur visual effect on them in order to look like light rays, and then I animated their opacity with a noise modifier in order to have them fade in and out. I also added these ambient vines on the top here. It was a similar technique, so I just drew them with Grease Pencil, and then I set the blending mode to hard light, lowered the opacity, and they just added a bit more texture to the scene. I did add these loose particles with Grease Pencil as well. For compositing, this is where I added the outlines. There's a couple of ways to add outlines around your object in Blender 3D, but for me, compositing seems to have worked the best in regards to the style that I've been doing in my videos. So if you want to learn more about this technique, you can check out my Galaxy typeface video where I walk through that process. But I have since revised that in order to make it more efficient, because I think there it was more of an experiment to see if I can add outlines through compositing, which I was able to do, but I wasn't sure if I was doing it correctly, or I kind of was just playing around with different options. Also, I did add a couple of glare nodes in order to intensify some of the brighter objects in the scene. I know that as of Blender 4.2, bloom is not in the render properties tab anymore, it's in the compositing tab. So I added bloom here, and then I also added another glare node using Simple Star, and that was able to help me get a lot of these shiny glowing effects in the scene. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I am probably going to do some sort of a deep dive on the techniques that I walk through in this video. I'm probably going to do some videos on Grease Pencil implementation with geometry nodes soon. That's one feature, one update that I'm really excited about, because I really like geometry nodes and Grease Pencil, and combining them just looks really awesome. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thanks again, and see you all in the next video.